Cole, quick review of last day. And Cole, could you put the bag on the ground there? It just looks like you're trying to hide a phone behind there. That's just me being paranoid. You would never try and do something like that. We talked last day about DNA. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. I said I'm not going to make you regurgitate that term, but I might make you recognize that term. Okay? DNA for short. DNA contains 4 base pairs, 4 codes. What we give them letters. What 4 letters? What 4 codes were there? A, T, C, and G. And which ones pair together? What pairs with C? G. What's an easy, dumb way to remember that those 2 pair together? Because a C and a G have the same curvy part, and then A goes with T. One of the nice things about that then, Christian, is if you split a piece of DNA up, so DNA is that famous double helix, if you split it up, if you only have one branch, you know the other branch, because you know what it must have paired with anyways. And in fact, when your cells get ready to divide, when they want to duplicate your DNA, that's how they replicate it. They split it up and then they match it up. It's a very nice system. Every one of your cells, whether it's a hair cell or a muscle cell or a heart cell or a skin cell or a fingernail cell or a whatever cell, Josh, every one of your cells has identical DNA in the nucleus, the same DNA. It's just that in different cells, certain sections of the DNA are activated or not in terms of making the right proteins for that particular cell to look like skin or hair or heart muscle or lung or whatever. Okay? We said that they typically are in codes of 3. And then we looked at, I gave you the coloring assignment there. That was just to give you an idea of the breakdown. We call this shape here the double helix. It's a very famous shape. 2 scientists, Watson and Crick, won a Nobel Prize for it. There is some controversy because really they ripped search of a woman named Rosalind Franklin, and she never got the Nobel Prize for it. And to this day, one of them has apologized because he did it unknowingly. The other person has basically said, women shouldn't do science. Kind of an old school, kind of a jerk. Okay. Anyways, they did win a Nobel Prize. So let's continue on talking about how all this works. So DNA, and we are going to, in a few days, do a lab where you're going to extract DNA. You are from strawberries, it turns out, because strawberries have lots of DNA. DNAs are long, thin strands. Remember how long I said one strand of DNA was that was wrapped in your cell? Cole, stand up. Okay. Slouch. A little more. About there. It's just that it's really wrapped up, thanks Cole, really, really, really wrapped up tight, really also because you want it all strung out because the different parts of the DNA for the different code, the nucleus wants to be able to access those to then create the protein. But when the cell is getting ready to divide, we need to get organized. It's sort of like if you're getting ready to move houses, that's when you start packing stuff up. Is that okay? All right. So here's where we left off. DNA organization. DNA molecules are very long. Think coal. Think coal. And therefore must be organized to keep them tidy and protect them, especially during the cell replication process. So normally while your cells are doing its thing, the DNA is all spiral. You can't see it without a very, very, very high-powered microscope because it's so thin. But just before the cell is ready to divide, the DNA starts to organize. Think a piece of thread and braid that thread together. When you braid the thread together, it forms something that we call chromatin. Think a thicker piece of thread. And then the chromatin gets braided together into a much thicker piece of thread. We call these chromosomes. Chromosomes are the ones that are visible even through a fairly standard microscope like the kind that we have. You can often in certain cells see chromosomes. They're, I'll say, Ibrahim, big on the cellular scale. They're still crazy small, but with a good microscope you can see those. You don't need a fancy schmancy, $5,000 microscope to see them. Okay? So normally your DNA is all untangled, like think a big thing of spaghetti, but then you slowly weave it together into chromatin, and chromatin makes up chromosomes. And we're going to talk now about chromosomes because it's probably a word that you've heard. You all have some. Chromosomes look sort of like a bow tie, or they sort of look like two capital letter V's joined at the point. You see them in the nucleus, and in fact, when you see them in the nucleus, you know, that cell's getting ready to divide. Do you notice they're symmetrical? And the reason that is this actually contains two copies of your DNA. It's going to split right here, and one copy of the DNA is going to go with the new cell. One copy of the DNA is going to stay in your old nucleus, and then it's going to unravel itself again and get back to work. So, every type of organism has a set number of chromosomes. Humans have 23 pairs for a total of 46. You may have heard on the radio or somewhere an ad for a company called 23andMe, which does DNA analysis or genetic analysis. The 23 comes from 23 chromosomes. One part of each pair is from the mother. The other is from the, fill in the word, father. This is why each of you looks sort of like a mix-up of your mom and your dad. Sort of. This is why, families look alike-ish. Here's a picture. Okay. You can see they all look sort of like little joined V's or bow ties. They're symmetrical. All of the combined genetic information stored within the chromosomes of a living cell is called a genome. I don't know if I gave you that word in your notes, but you may have heard about the human genome. What we really mean is, that's all the genetic code for humans that's stored in the chromosomes. Fruit fly cell, a little simpler. It's got 4. We have 23. These ones are special, the X and the Y chromosomes. Does anybody know what the X and the Y chromosomes do? Okay, it's those two, while you're developing as a fetus, that determine whether you're going to be a boy or a girl. They're the two that determine gender. Let's talk about that. So, the chromosomes contain genes. What's a gene? It's a set of DNA codes that codes for a specific protein. And so these genes determine your, everything, but your hair color, your eye color, whether you have a hitchhiker's thumb or a straight thumb. Some people have this, some people have that. Whether you have hair on your knuckles or not, everything. So you can think of chromosomes, those big bow tie shaped things, as a big book. The genes are the words that make up the book. One of these pairs of genes determines your gender. If you have 2 X chromosomes, you'll develop into a female when you're in your mother's womb. If you have an X and a Y chromosome, you'll be a boy. This right here explains why some types of physical ailments, challenges are more prevalent in one gender over another. For example, color blindness. Why are men so much more likely to be colorblind? Last year, the NFL was trying out new uniforms, and they famously last year, I think it was the Jets were playing the Cardinals, and the Jets were wearing dark green, and the Cardinals were wearing dark red. and the NFL got flooded with complaints from male football players who were colorblind because they couldn't tell the difference at all between the uniforms, because also the darkness was right around the same shade. So they were watching players throw to other players wearing the same uniforms as far as they were concerned. Oops, they didn't think of that. This year, the NFL has promised we'll do more research and make sure if you're colorblind, you can still watch a game. So why are males so much more likely to be colorblind? Well, it turns out the X chromosome is much bigger than the Y chromosome. So it has way more genes. It's a bigger book with more words, more information. And it turns out the gene that allows us to see color is on the X chromosome. How many X chromosomes do girls have? 2. How many do guys have? Guys have no backup. If that gene is damaged, you're out of luck. Girls, some of you might be colorblind in one gene, but your other gene just picked up the slack fine. Okay? So if it's damaged, then you can't see color properly. Women have 2. So if one is damaged, the other can't do the job. This may even be the root or what's behind the notion that women have better color and fashion sense than males. And that's being stereotypical, I realize. But it may just be the fact that, guys, we don't have a backup. Men only have 1. So if it's damaged, okay. I guess you're all turning the page. Is that right? Put your pencils down. So a nice video, good graphics, and I hope that kind of put everything together. So what does a gene do then? So a gene contains information to make a protein, a specific protein. Okay? By the way, that would be the definition of a gene. A gene contains information to make a specific protein. And remember, proteins are what do all the jobs in your cells. In the video that we saw at the beginning of class, they were the robots. Cells are different from each other, even though they have the same DNA. Again, your heart cell has the same exact DNA as your lung cell, as your hair cell, as your skin cell, as your fingernail cell, as your whatever cell. Why? Because different genes are used to make different proteins in different cells. So in your heart cell, Trevor, some of the genes would be turned off, the stuff that might make your heart grow hair. Don't want that. Some of the other genes would be activated or turned on. We're starting to learn how that works. Okay? So remember though, your heart cell also does contain the DNA blueprint to grow hair or fingernails, or determine your height, or anything. But each unique cell has parts of the DNA code turned on and turned off. Is that okay, Matt? Yeah? You're not looking at your phone or anything like that, foolish. Okay, sorry. That's the answer, by the way, the DNA coloring sheet. That's the answer to question number 10 from that DNA coloring sheet. So question number 10 said, if all cells have exactly the same DNA, how do you think some cells become brain cells and others become skin cells? Because different genes are activated or turned on and off, different proteins are created, and you're made of protein. So the right proteins become a brain cell. The right proteins become a heart cell. says read pages 127 to 130 and do reading check page 130. I think we're going to do reading check right now together. Can you open to page 130, please? Let's get even more specific. Jaden, who's going to sit up. Let's make a protein. I've told you your protein. I've told you that's the key to everything. So, to make a protein, because proteins are created outside the nucleus, but the DNA is inside the nucleus, first thing that's got to happen is the DNA has to be copied. You can imagine in the video that we saw, it was sort of like a massive filing cabinet, and we say, excuse me, could you give me the genetic code, the DNA portion for heart cell, please? Okay. Has to be copied. It makes a molecule that we call mRNA, messenger RNA. What's RNA? Well, it's related to DNA. We'll talk about it. But you can sort of think about it. You know what? Let's make it a recipe. Let's make it a cookbook. But you're not allowed to take the cookbook out of the bookshelf. You photocopy it. Okay. Yeah. It's typically written with a lowercase m and a capital R, N, and A. Yeah. Does it have to be? I don't know if I'd take marks off, but I've just never seen it written any other way, so let's be nerds and do it that way. Can you open in your textbook, please, to page 131? Page 131. mRNA, messenger RNA, is similar to DNA, but it is single-stranded, not double-helixed, not double-stranded. Okay? And it only contains the information for a single gene. So imagine that twisty spiral ladder, Trevor. Imagine taking one side of it and one short chunk of it. Okay? By the way, why do you only need one side of it? I know, yeah, I mean, if I have a AGT, it has to match up once it's outside of the nucleus in the cytoplasm. The chemical bond that A is going to match up with only fits with a T. So I only need the one half. The messenger RNA, the mRNA, is used by the ribosomes to make a protein. Sort of like using a photocopied recipe to bake a cake. I showed you last day that molecular visualization video where we said we actually think this is kind of what it looks like on the molecular level. We don't, can't zoom in that much. Okay? So open to page 131, look at the diagram there. Here are some questions that we're going to think about in just a second. I'm going to pause the video. We're going to talk about this, and let me find page. Okay, so I wrote down here, study the diagram. Make sure you understand the logic of the steps, why they have to be in that order. I might feel comfortable giving you some of those steps and just saying, put them in the right order. That might be a nice test question. Okay, Brooke? Note, this is for proteins that are released outside of the cell. Proteins that are needed by the cell are still usually modified by the Golgi body, but then instead of the vesicle transporting them to the cell membrane, it just dumps them, transports them to wherever they're needed. You want to fill this in. This is the key. A gene is a piece of DNA that contains the code for a specific protein. Put enough proteins together, you get tissues. Put enough tissues together, you get organs. Put enough organs together, you get life. Put enough life together, well, I don't know if some of you are living right now based on how much you're shutting your eyes, but most of you are living. Okay. Got a couple of videos. Let me get you your homework first. So from the textbook, I am going to ask for a textbook assignment, number 1, 5 to 7, number 9, and number 13 on page 135. Also, if you haven't finished the DNA coloring assignment, you can get that